Hey guys, welcome to Get Live Podcast Kunai. It's me, Bish. And you're like, oh my god, Bish, where the hell have the Kunai episodes been? You've been like weaning us on like 2 episodes in a whole year. What the hell's been going on? COVID has obviously made it very difficult for us to record, as you guys can imagine, but we're hanging in there. We're gonna try our best to get you guys episodes. If not every month, maybe every 2 months, every 3 months, etc. Because obviously you guys know that Kunai takes a long time to get done. In the meantime, I just want to introduce our guest today, because there is no Kevin, there is no Joe for the meantime, but we've got someone. He's been on the podcast before. No, it's not Tyson. But yeah, we've got Will on today. He's been on the podcast before, and we've been scheduling this episode maybe for the last year, and every time we record it, there's always been problems. I don't know, but it's always been the case. So finally, we're doing it. It's Sweetness and Lightning. For those that don't know about Sweetness and Lightning, Sweetness and Lightning is an animation television series adapted by TMS Entertainment. So if you guys don't know who TMS are, they're the people that are currently animating Dr. Stone. They've done Detective Conan, DuckTales as well, Spider-Man, the animated series. So they have a very large repertoire in terms of animation for Western world and also in Japan. So really, really cool company. We'll get into it a little bit, but before we do, let's get onto the disclaimer. For you new folks, Get Live Podcast Kunai is an anime discussion podcast under the Get Live group. Due to the nature of discussion, we cannot avoid spoilers of the show to be discussed. For those shows that are based off an existing piece of work, whether it's manga, light novel, or some other media form, we're not going to be covering the source material. If you'd like to recommend a show for us to watch or make an episode of Kunai on, leave us a suggestion on our Discord page, getalivepodcast.com/Discord. And big thanks to our sponsors, JList, Japan Crate, and Crunchyroll. Sweetness and Lightning focuses around a single dad whose name is Kouhei. So Kouhei Inuzuka is a teacher who's been raising his daughter Tsumugi by himself following the death of his wife. So I think his wife died recently in this whole scheme of things. And it's basically his journey on making food, etc., learning about how to make food and making his daughter happy through food with the help of one of his students, Kotori-chan. So, Will, I want to know your sort of first impressions. How did you get into the show? What was your first introduction to the show? Were you watching it simulcasted, or like how did you know about it?
I watched it when it was airing, and I watched it weekly. Fell in love with it, honestly. Spoiler there. That I do really enjoy the show. I was actually introduced to it by an anime friend that I had gotten to know talking with on the Crunchyroll forum, and we actually were in a anime Discord group together, and we were just talking about different shows and things like that. And I was kind of trying to branch out from my normal. I'm always looking for different things to try to sink my teeth into and explore outside the normal anime. And he was a fan of the manga, had been reading the manga for a long time, and he was really hyping up the show. So he's the one that told me to check it out, so I did, and here we are.
Awesome. I mean, for me, I would say I can't even remember really how I got into it. The way I found out about it was through the manga, actually, which is really rare. I was really getting into manga around, I don't know, I would say maybe 2017. I was really buying a lot more manga, and I was actually going to comic book stores and buying them. And I really wanted to get a lot of romance manga, a lot of shoujo beat stuff. I think this manga was done by Yen Press. I'm not sure, I can't remember. But either way,
I think it's Kodansha.
I went into the comic book store and they had a lot of manga on a 3-for-2 deal. Usually what I do is I pick 3 different manga, from the first chapter, the first volume, and we see how it goes. And usually I think I can't remember which ones I picked, actually. I think I picked Kiss Him Not Me, maybe also Kami-sama Kiss as well, and Sweetness and Lightning. Basically, it was a manga that I got for free, and I just enjoyed it. I was like, oh my god, it's really cool.
That's kind of cool, just thinking about it in that idea with that kind of company of stories too.
To be honest with you, it was just I didn't know what it was about. I didn't do any research, but I saw it and I was just like, oh my god. I didn't even open it. I just saw the cover and I was like, hell yeah, man, I'm going for this. I thought it was a romance manga or something like that.
Was it issue 1?
It was issue 1, yeah.
Okay.
Even when you search it on the internet, on Crunchyroll and stuff like that, it comes under the romance tag. I would say it's very misleading because it's not a romantic anime by any means.
They're probably getting the information from the manga itself, how it does does develop. Even in the manga later on, it's not even romance, but it has some romance like annotations to it, I guess you could say. So, but I think it's more relationships and not romance.
Yeah, I would say so. At least looking at the anime, which is what we do here on Kunai. But to be honest with you, like my first impressions, I was really blown away with how kawaii the show was, like in terms of how colorful it is, how nicely animated, and how like very heartwarming it is. You know, at first I felt it was like one of those feel good shows. Like it was just full of energy. Yes, it does have its times where there are more sadder plot points and whatnot, but I just kept watching to watch because it just made me feel good. And I also really wanted to learn about food because I was like really never used to cook. I never used to do anything for myself in that sense. So learning about cooking through anime that isn't something like Food Wars was interesting.
Well, let's be honest, who doesn't love food?
But yeah, it kind of sounds odd that I say this in my first impressions, but watching it for the first time, it felt very nostalgic. I kind of looked at my own life and I remember memories that I have of my dad because obviously he passed away and whatnot. And the first episode of the show made me cry a lot. Not because of the whole situation with my dad, but it was just because one thing that Tsumugi-chan said, and that got me a lot. It was just like, write a letter to mum and ask her to make me some meat. That made me cry. I was just like, shit, man. Like at the beginning, obviously she's not getting the best meals and whatnot. All she wants is like a home cooked meal. I don't think she really understands that her mum has passed away.
Early on, no. And that's like starts out with the dad literally looking at the food that he's getting for his daughter, and it's like microwave meals and TV dinners, and he's like, oh my god, what am I doing? I've got to do better by her. It's on me now.
You can really see that coming out when he actually says, I want my daughter to have a good meal. That in itself, it brought the show down to earth a little bit from the first episode, and that also made me cry as well. Like I was just like, fuck, like this guy, he really loves his family to that point. Like this one small thing means the world to him. You know, it's such a small thing, but it makes such a big impact.
Almost like a revelation. So it's that whole concept of unquestioned love, obviously for his daughter, but also, like I said, the revelation that he knows that his mission in life is to do better by her, and that it's going to be on him for at least a while now.
And you know what? That in itself made me respect the show, because usually in a lot of anime, you don't get that much character development within the first episode. But like I said, it's such a small line to say, but even in that one small line, you get to learn a lot about Kouhei as a character and also a lot about Tsumugi. It made me want to binge this show straight away. Like, obviously I didn't watch this simulcasted, so I wanted to binge the show and see how Sensei would grow as a father and how he would kind of overcome these seemingly really small obstacles. But obviously, like I said, if you don't know how to cook and if you don't know how to, you know, prepare meals, those small obstacles mean a lot. But it's nice to see him overcome all of those things. And I think that is sort of the perfect overview of what this show is about. It's about a dad that really wants to learn more so he can do better for his family. And I think that in itself is very admirable to me.
I think it's a really good setup about just diving into what the show is ultimately about. So I'll just go over here with my first impressions of it. So going into that first episode, like I said, going in cold, not knowing anything about it, for me, like I got an initial sense and feeling of sadness from the get-go, but there was also love there. There was heart there. There was sincerity there. And right from the start, it also establishes that food has meaning in the series. Food has meaning in our life, and it's beyond just taste, just nutrition. You know, it's about your love that you put into the food that you're making for your family and your relatives and the people that you love and care about. Even when he goes and just makes like the simple rice for Tsumugi and she's enjoying it and like starts to cry and then promises her and says, you know, daddy will make you good food.
Even seeing that whole rice thing, it kind of surprised me a little bit because it was just like, I don't know, it's weird because I never used to make rice until I got a rice cooker. So I was just like, do people in Japan not have rice cookers? Like, why is he making, like, you know, it seemed a bit odd to me. Like,
not everyone does use rice cookers. A majority of people do, but I mean, there are some people that still do it old school pot and pan and water, and you know what I mean? I
know it seems a bit odd, but it's just every anime that I see with food in it, rice is always coming out of a rice cooker. So to see the rice being cooked in that way, I mean, it was like, what was it, in like a ceramic pot? Like, even like that's beyond old school, you know? That's like,
yeah, there's a lot of people that still use those.
All right, no, I didn't know that. It was interesting to me, so that kind of confused me a little bit. To see her sort of tear up over rice, it made me feel really upset. It was just like, shit, if she's getting this excited kid for rice. What the fuck was she eating before? Like, what was the food that was given to her? That rice is amazing. You know what I mean?
And I totally get that. And it's kind of funny though, because you also have to look at it from the aspect of her being a child. So, like, I'll give examples here when I'm teaching some of my students and we start talking about food and they start being able to practice expressing things about themselves, such as, I like this, I don't like that, my favorite, whatever is this. And like, I'll simply, like, we'll start talking about food and I'll ask them, like, oh, what food do you like? Or what is your favorite food? And lots of little kids will say rice.
Okay.
Think of it from like an American or a Western point of view. If you ask a child in that same kind of age group, what's your favorite food? A lot of them are going to say things like macaroni and cheese, chicken nuggets, French fries. Those simple, warm, comfort foods that kids can just dig into.
That makes sense. I mean, to kind of dive into it a little more, like, isn't the Japanese word for food in itself, like gohan, means rice, right?
Yes.
It makes a lot of sense when you put it that way, to be honest with you. But that kind of goes into a lovely point about the show itself, because the show is structured in such a way where each episode focuses on a different recipe or a different meal. So I really wanted to ask you, what was your favorite episodes and moments within this show? Because obviously I found it quite hard to find one, because every episode in itself has its own merit, has its own enjoyment, whether it is for specifically to learn the recipe or the character development that happens throughout. So what would you say is your favorites?
My favorite episode overall was number 7, but that was mostly just because of the shark song.
Yes. Oh my God. I love that episode. But I love it for a different reason. And I'll let you finish why. But
well, what I really liked about that is not just from the actual shark song itself, but the fact that you actually got to see different sides of both Tsumugi and Kouhei, where like Kouhei actually got mad and yelled at her and was, being that I don't want to say disgruntled parent, but that's kind of what it was. Like, he got to a point where he was so scared and so worried about her that he didn't know how to react. So when he finally saw her, he just went off. And then on the flip side of that, you got to see Tsumugi throwing the tantrums that a 4-year-old child, can go into. And I think that it really humanized the series as a whole, because up to that point it had some serious moments. It had things dealing with the moms passing and all that type of stuff, but it was still, each episode had been kind of, for lack of better words, happy-go-lucky and cute and funny and about the cooking and the eating. But this time you got to see them in different lights, you know what I mean? So like I said, it really kind of tied them and grounded them to a more reality type situation.
to be honest with you, the reason why I love that episode, why it's one of my favorite episodes, is not just because of the conflict that occurred, right? It's also because of the fact that even within the animation and the art style and just the scenery changes. Because a lot of the show takes place either at home, Kotori's house, or the school, or kindergarten, right? So it's like there's not much else that happens. So for her to go on this little adventure and then obviously singing the shark song and having those sharks pop out and having those random like school kids just help her across the street, it was quite nice. Or even the little old lady, like that was quite cool. I was just like, wow, so we get to see more of this world. It's not just these 4 scenes that we normally see. I thought that was very interesting. But another thing that I thought was great was just the fact, as you mentioned, very humanizing. And I can understand where Kouhei is coming from, because this child is his life. This is his daughter. It's everything to her, especially considering that he had just lost his wife a year earlier. And that's pretty much all he has left of, his wife in general, because obviously that's his offspring. So to lose her, I can understand where he's coming from and where he's thinking like, shit, I can't let her out of my sight for a second. If anything had happened to her, what would I have done? And I can understand Tsumugi's side as well, because all she's trying to do is that she saw her dad was sick and she was trying to get him stuff to make him feel better. And she doesn't understand all the different dangerous things in the world. She's an innocent child. She doesn't have the capacity to understand that. From both sides, I can understand.
Going back to that whole thing too, like it's also a little bit different in Japan as well when it comes to kids. So like, but they're looked at already as like a member of the community, and everyone around is supposed to kind of help and look out for them. And that's why you'll see things like, Obachans, Obasans, older older people talking with kids, walking with them. You'll see, you know, older kids, like high school kids, help little kids like walk down the street, look for things like that. It's also why, like, you look at something compared here to back in America, like if you just saw, you know, a strange man sitting on a park bench watching kids play while drinking an Asahi in America, that'd be like, what is this guy doing? Who is he?
Yeah.
But here in Japan, it's expected. It's expected for adults to just watch out for the kids, things like that. So it's like I said, it's kind of a different take when it comes to those kind of things. But I also think that also shows too why in this situation with Tsumugi, why she was already in this like sense of I can go do this on my own, even at 4 years old, to go help my dad who's sick, because you know people are going to look out for me, not knowing that there are still dangers in the world.
I wouldn't say it's necessarily a culture shock for me, but I mean in the UK as well, like you don't see kids walking home from school, especially like these younger kids. You don't really see them walking home from school by themselves, right? It's usually they get picked up by a parent, they go home by a parent, etc. So I mean, I've seen this in other anime where it's like, you know, younger kid. I don't know, maybe not middle school, but what do you call them? Like in the UK we call them primary school, but like elementary school kids, right?
Yeah. So here it's elementary, junior, and high.
Yeah, I mean elementary school kids. I mean here in the UK you don't see them going home by themselves. Like that's not a thing. But I mean in Japan it happens a lot, no?
Yes and no. So there's, like I said, there's always some kind of adult around. Like at, you know, at all my schools, for instance, like usually 2 or maybe 3 teachers will walk home with the youngest kids from the school. They don't walk all the way home, but they walk them to like a certain point where then they'll meet like a grandparent or a parent, and then they'll go the rest of the way home, type of a deal. Or like some communities have volunteers, like I said, that are usually older retired folks, that they come to the school and meet the kids and walk home with them, kind of a thing. But then when they're older, like I said, in junior high school and high school, they're just kind of left to their own devices and things like that. You know, get home however you can.
Okay. Other than episode 7, what would you say would be standout episodes or highlights for you?
Just remember, I wrote down the quote from episode 3 where Kouhei reminded Tsumugi saying, "You're a good girl." Because I think that was the episode where she got upset where she had been blamed for like taking the other students like clay or something like that, and was getting upset, and she was like, "Am I a bad girl?" And he's like, "No, you're a good girl."
For me, I know it sounds a bit odd, but I'm not really a fan of those kind of episodes. I know it sounds really shitty for me to say this, like I don't like that sort of character development, but I found it got annoying very quickly because I understand, yes, she is a child, but constantly seek that sort of gratification annoyed me a little bit. I was like, is this all we see of Tsumugi? Like, she gets like annoyed quite easily and just frustrated, and she always wants to seek her father's approval. But I get it. She's 4 years old, but still.
No, I understand what you're saying, but I also don't think it's just his approval. It's just one of those things that you know, kids in general just don't want to be viewed in a bad light and things like that. Like I know some of my students that if they get caught misbehaving, they'll sometimes get upset, not because they got caught, but because it's like, oh no, I did something bad.
So for me, what kind of annoyed me more so was just the fact that there are some points in the anime in which she doesn't like to be treated like a child, and she wants to seek independence. And I think even in the episode where she's like, "I'm not a baby, I'm a cat," you know what I mean? She doesn't want to be seen as like this sort of person that needs to be protected all the time. She doesn't want to live in that bubble, but at the same time she is a child, right? And she does get upset when her dad scolds her. Do you see what I'm saying? Technically, yes, like she doesn't like to be treated as a baby, but yet she is treated like a baby.
Well, it's also, you know, obviously they could only do so much in the like 12 episodes and things like that, but you know, part of the entire series too eventually becomes kind of like Tsumugi's self-discovery as she grows, because like in the manga she actually gets older and everything, like it continues on until she leaves to go to high school.
In terms of like other favorite episodes, I wouldn't say that they're my favorite in terms of story, because I don't know if you agree with me, but this show you can pretty much, apart from a few episodes, you can pretty much watch it out of order and it would still kind of make sense. And I think that's probably because it's structured, I don't want to say this, but it's kind of structured like a sitcom, like an American sitcom, like something like The Office. I know it sounds a bit weird, and I know you're looking at me like, what the hell?
I can totally see that point of view. Yeah. So it's an interconnected story, but it's kind of loose. It's same characters, and they are quote unquote aging and developing, but it's like if you watch episode 10 before you ever watched episode 3, you'd be fine. Now the first episode episode, you still kind of need to start there. But other than that, yeah.
And I think it's one of the reasons why, for example, we never sort of cover slice of life anime on Kunai, just because there is no real story structure. I think Sweetness and Lightning is a little bit of an exception, only because the show in itself is centered around food. So there is a topic of discussion for each episode. It's not like it's random, funny, comedic moments that don't really mean anything. But because every meal has some sort of personal connection to either Kouhei, Kotori-chan, or Tsumugi. So there is character development through food. And I thought that was very interesting, hence why I sort of suggested it for Kunai. But going back onto my favorite episodes, I would say my favorite episodes are the ones in which they cook very interesting meals. And I know that sounds really stupid, but like for me, episode 3 was a really good episode, but not because of the whole Tsumugi stealing the clay and whatnot. I found that sort of laborious, but it was making the hamburg steak. It was that sort of build up. She wanted to have these hamburger steaks, right? And I think before, if I'm not mistaken, he bought them from the grocery store, right?
Yes.
Obviously, she was used to that sort of style of food. It was easy to eat. It was basic, I would say basic nutrition at that point, with it not being fresh and whatnot. But she was used to that. As you mentioned before, the whole kids eating the whole, French fries, chicken nuggets and whatnot. So for her, that was like her comfort food, So to see that and to see it being made in a very interesting way, I don't know, like to see it made with like this sort of teriyaki sauce was quite interesting. Because, I mean, it seemed a bit odd to me. Like, no one eats a burger like that. You're American, right? So no one really eats something like that in America. It seemed a bit odd to me.
Well, in America, we usually call it something different. Like we call it a Salisbury steak. So like here in Japan, like if you say hamburg, usually they mean like a hamburger steak. Now, if you say hamburger, then they usually are meaning the hamburger sandwich. But yeah, actually, like hamburg steak is actually really popular here.
I didn't know much about it. So for me, it was my mission. I was like, oh my God, what is this new food? Like, it's basically a burger patty on rice. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Literally all it is.
I know, but it was just so simple. And I'll be real with you, when I saw it, I kind of felt the same way Tsumugi-chan felt. So I was like, hell yeah, man. Like, just because it was new for me. Obviously, for Tsumugi, it wasn't new. I would say the fact that it was freshly made it amazing to her. Do you know what I mean? The fact that dad made this meal, it was something that she could be proud of.
It's like going from eating, let's just use the term like a frozen hamburger patty, to doing something that you saw made in front of you that you helped make and things like that. You smelled it while it was cooking and all that. It's an entirely different experience.
I'm not sure if you have any more favorite moments or episodes, but I kind of really want to get into the story aspect, because as we mentioned before, this show doesn't necessarily have much of a story. It does have character development through food, but not an sort of overarching story there. So I wanted to talk about the theme of food.
Well, I just want to touch on just 2 more quick things here. I loved episode 4. That was the one with the green peppers. So that's, kind of a real hit and miss thing here with kids, because, they're a little bit bitter. And I just love that after they thought that they had gotten her to eat green peppers and put it in her food, and then as Kouhei's eating, he finds out that she's snuck the green peppers into his meal. And then she just gives him the most smug look that like you've ever seen. Like if you go on Google and you type the word like anime smug.
Yes, I know which one you're talking about.
Many of the pictures will be that look from that face. And then also that same episode when she was doing her little no dump dance. Thought that was great. And then also episode 6. I remember that one because of I always mispronounce the name. Was it Yagi? Yagi and Shinobu. They come to have the gyoza party, and like they come together, show up there together, I should say, and end up finding out that they can actually cook. And like, you guys can cook? And it was just that whole thing that, once again, bringing up that the whole topic of how food really brings people together. So it's not just the dad, the daughter, it's all these other characters being involved as well.
Talking about that whole experience with food and having everyone kind of coming into it, I kind of kept this a secret for this episode. But because I've really been getting into food and really getting into our other podcast, Umai, which is actually finally aired, in which we kind of talk about Sweetness and Lightning briefly, I wanted to say, and I wanted to mention that I've actually done most of the recipes from the show.
That's a great plug. I'm just saying, great little plug there.
I had to do it, but it was a lot lot to learn because, as I mentioned, this show doesn't really have much of a plot, but you learn a lot from the show itself. Like, I wanted to try it myself because it's like watching the show made me very excited for food, made me think that, oh my God, I can do new shit. Like before, 1 or 2 years ago, I was just making omelets and I did some crazy combinations that didn't quite work, like putting watermelon in an omelet. And obviously, if you try and fry a watermelon, it doesn't work because it just becomes gloopy because it's mostly water and you shouldn't do that.
I was just going to say, why do you think it's called a watermelon?
And look, for me, when I open the fridge, I see what's in there and it's like eggs and like watermelon. Don't get me wrong, my fridge is always full, but I always look for these weird things to put into food. And I was like, maybe this will work. Maybe that will work, you know?
With food and cooking, it's always good to experiment. Otherwise, how else are you going to know? Like, just think, I think about this all the time. Like, who was the first person that thought about taking flour, eggs, butter, and sugar and making a cake? You know what I mean? Like, who thought of that first?
Yes, watermelon omelet doesn't sound great, and it wasn't, but I mean, I learned from that. And now I don't really cook eggs to begin with, but where I really came to love this show was after seeing the Hamburg steak episode 3. That's when I decided, you know what, I'm actually going to go and cook this. So I watched this show multiple times because, like I said, we were rescheduling this episode so many times. I think I've watched this show like 7 times. Technically, it's like the most watched anime I've ever seen. I was constantly rewatching as well to get those recipes correct because they do show the recipe in the show. You can actually pause it, and it is translated as well if you're watching it on Crunchyroll. You can pause it and actually follow the recipe because Kotori's mum writes it all down and she put these really cute little drawings and stuff, which I thought was really interesting. And Kotori mentions that it's written in simple Japanese so a child can read it and understand it. And I thought, you know what, that's pretty cool. So if these recipes are designed for children to do, then I think I could do them as well. So that's why I tried the Hamburg steak I tried making. I did not do the gratin because that is just too advanced for me. Donuts, yes, done that. The gyoza I did as well. The mochi I didn't do. The stew, I did that. The squid stew. I did the curry and I did crepes as well. I didn't do, and the, I can't pronounce it, but the final episode, okonomiyaki, whatever it's called. I did that.
Yeah, okonomiyaki, yeah. So I'll just say, like, going along with your little story you're telling right now, like, one of the notes that I put, like, at the end of my thing here, because, you know, I'm a bit of a foodie, too, and I enjoy cooking. It says, you can cook all the meals presented in the series, and they're very true to life.
It's a no-brainer. They're not difficult. Yes, there are some points in which, yes, you need to chop and whatnot, but you can't really cook without chopping. I've never heard of any sort of meal in which you don't need to use a knife other than rice. It was just interesting to me just to sort of learn with them and just experiment as well. Like the first time I made that Hamburg steak, I was like, fuck, this is amazing. Like I felt the Tsumugi energy, you know, like the positivity behind it. And I kind of encourage everyone to sort of do this. And I'm not sure if this is a sort of challenge or something, but take the time to watch this show. And if you've never made food before, or if you don't really cook for yourself, take the time and try some recipes because they aren't that simple to do. Like it doesn't take a genius. But yeah, no, I mean, like in terms of how the episodes work and all of that, like I've had like a personal connection to a lot of these things just because of the food aspect of it, especially with the curry as well. Like at the beginning, I tried making it was shit, and then I kind of put it up a level, you know? Don't get me wrong, I'm not making it fresh. I'm using a curry roux, but it's, you know, it still counts.
It's still cooking. So I cook curry here a lot, and I usually get a curry roux. I actually prefer the block curry like that.
Okay.
And I tell you, it's good, you know, and like it's used for a reason, and it's a very, very, very popular dinner and meal in Japan in general. Lots of people eat curry multiple times a week, even here.
So I love it. I'm not gonna lie. Like I want to ask you a question. Out of all of the food presented in the show, what would be your favorite meal from the ones that are presented? If you know, it's maybe something that you've never tried before, and you're like, shit, I want to try that, or something in which you've tried and you're like, oh man, I'm always going to go back to this.
I've actually cooked quite a few of these meals myself or gotten them other places and everything. But one thing, like I keep talking about it and then I never do it, is like, you know, a lot of people around here know that I like to cook, and they've suggested, it's like, why don't you have like, you know, a cooking party, a food party? So I keep going back, like I said, to the gyoza party episode. I would love to do something like that. So that's something that really intrigues me, because I've never made my own gyoza. And a lot of people here do. They like, you know, gyoza is actually really easy easy to get here, either frozen, or made from like the convenience stores, things like that, and people can just bring it home, heat it up. But you can actually just get all the ingredients at supermarkets and make it yourself. And I would love to try to do that sometime.
I mean, it's pretty simple. It's like I don't know if don't have to explain it, but it's like a pasty, right? Yeah, if you've ever had like a Cornish pasty, but it's kind of like that.
They're kind of like a pierogi almost.
Oh yeah, pretty much. That's basically what it is. I think the most difficult thing about making gyoza is the actual. I don't know. The lining doesn't sound right. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but like the
shell.
Like the shell of the gyoza, right? The pastry part of it. Like that is difficult to do, but you can actually go to a lot of Japanese supermarkets, a lot of Asian supermarkets and buy them pre-made and just fill them and steam them or fry them or do whatever you want to do. So it's like very simple to do.
Like I said, I don't think it's going to be for me any one particular food or meal, but just like for me, it'd be the idea of having like it's some kind of cooking party, cooking get together, whether it's like hot pot, curry, gyoza, whatever. And people just like, hey, bring some vegetables. We'll see what we can make up with it. You know what I mean? I'll pull out pots and my burners, all that type of stuff, set up the the kotatsu, and it's like, let's just have a meal.
You have a kotatsu?
Oh yeah, of course I do.
What the hell, man? How did you find one? Well, I mean, I'm not going to say how did you find one of them. You can find them anywhere, but I found them so difficult to get over here.
I've actually done a little bit of looking into this. They're starting to become a little bit more popular outside of Japan. Like I've actually seen people actually getting them like in America now and some other countries. But yeah, like during winter, I pretty much live at my kotatsu. Like I'll take my laptop, set it up on it, and I just sit there. The only problem is it's dangerous, and it's dangerous because I'll fall asleep at it.
Well, I mean, that's a pretty popular anime trope, no? Just everyone just falling asleep under the kotatsu.
I talk to the other teachers and staff that I work with all the time, and they're like, yeah, I fell asleep with my kotatsu.
There was another thing that I wanted to mention in regards to just like the cooking aspect of it, because you mentioned this whole coming together and wanting to do this cooking parties and stuff like that, and I feel that this show can kind of encourage that. I was kind of disappointed not to find was there was no hot pot episode. Like usually in anime, not necessarily cooking anime, but usually in animes that have a large ensemble or maybe more than 4 characters or whatnot, there will usually be a hot pot style episode. Like we see it in Persona, we see it in other series where they just come together and just have like a campsite type situation and eat a hot pot. But I'm surprised they didn't do that here.
It's gonna sound really bad, but I don't remember them even having an episode or a time where they could have hot pots, because like a lot of times people only do hot pots like late fall through winter kind of a deal, and I don't remember there being any specific timing around that, or if it was at a time before they had all the characters had kind of come together.
To be honest with you, it's a good point that you mentioned that. It's just like everything seems to happen in a void, and that's one thing that I didn't necessarily enjoy. I understand like if it wasn't happening in the void, then obviously then there wouldn't be much reason anyway, because it's about food. There's not much to do other than that. But it would have been nice to have seen a little bit of snow or something that was like Christmassy. Like there was nothing like that. I think it would have been interesting to see a Christmas episode with that sort of family dynamic as well. Like maybe them making a Christmas cake. You know what I mean? Like I think that would have been interesting to see, especially because the show has Tsumugi, and it would have been great to see, how energetic she would have got because of Christmas. Because, kids, they fucking love Christmas.
Yeah, I think it's also because this is one of those series where they were actually trying to follow the manga, so it just hadn't gotten to that point yet. So like from the time that the anime starts till we get to the last episode, I think it's only been like a year.
You've gone through a year within 12 episodes. Like there's a lot of time jumps and there's a lot of shit that you don't feel that has sort of properly been resolved. Like for me, if they didn't make that distinction and say it was a year had passed since his wife passed away, I would have thought that this anime would have taken place maybe over a couple of months, because the characters and their growth together doesn't seem like a year's worth of growth. It seems like a month, 2 months of growth.
It's funny because it's a condensed show, and within the show it's condensed episodes.
Well, that's another thing, because even the way that the show is structured, I think this is obviously very important to discuss, is like, as you said, that it's very like situational in that sense. You get set up at the beginning that sort of hints to what's going on, then you see like a cut to the school where he's talking. Like it's always the same sort of style of episode. So Tsumugi wants something, he speaks to Kotori-chan like outside of the school window, then Kotori-chan invites them, they make the food, and then it's pretty much a cooking cookie cutter situation. I wouldn't want to say a monster of the week, but it's basically a monster of the week show, but with food. And I find that it's kind of limiting in terms of what you can do in terms of growth. So that in itself for me was a bit upsetting. And like I said, the story was slow, yet it was going too quickly for my honest opinion. It was just like, I don't know. And I think it's probably because we didn't really see more of what actually happened to the characters outside of this whole cooking situation. I would imagine within the manga, you'd see more about the dramas and events in their lives, maybe Tsumugi-chan's birthday, that kind of stuff. You would have seen more of that just because you have more time to do so. I don't want to say that this doesn't do the manga justice, and it causes some concerns for me later on, which I'll kind of speak about. But have you kind of felt like that? Did you feel the pacing was off in this show?
No, not really. I mean, there's certain point in it where I was like, well, why didn't they develop this more? Or, why did they rush this kind of part? But it's like very minimal. Like I didn't really, pay attention really to the overall pacing in the way that you did, just because of the fact I was so engrossed with everything that was going on and seeing them actually, go through the daily routines and the cooking and all that type of stuff. So I felt for me watching it week to week versus doing it as like a binge watch, it's also a lot different of a feeling to it. Now, of course, I've gone back and I've rewatched the show 2 more times since it originally aired. But like I said, I still have that same kind of feeling because of how I initially watched it.
I was very excited to watch it at the beginning for its story and whatnot. But then, like I said, I've seen this show like 7 times. So it kind of became more of a recipe book for me.
Gotta remember, anime is basically advertisement for the source material. So it's trying to get you to go and get the manga.
The funny thing is, it doesn't do a great job because I bought the manga beforehand. That's another thing. And I only own 1 volume. The anime hasn't made me want to go and buy more of the manga.
Whereas, like, I had the opposite experience since I watched the anime first, and I watched a couple times now. I went back and I haven't read all the manga, but I went back and I've read it through, e-readers and stuff like that. But as a matter of fact, I actually have every volume sitting on my wish list on Amazon. I'm just waiting to pull the trigger to buy them because I'm waiting for them to get volume 7 in. I don't know why. Like, right in the middle of the run, they're missing volume 7. So once they get that, I'm just going to just buy them all and start reading them.
One other thing that I wanted to mention, I remembered it now, was the fact that this show is done by TMS, and I kind of want to bring Dr. Stone up for a second. I know it sounds a bit odd, but I watch a show like Dr. Stone and it feels like an hour has passed, even though it's the same runtime. It's like 22 minutes. There's so much going on that it just feels like it's one of like those hour-long TV shows, right? But I watched this show and it is, once again, it's 22 minutes, but it feels like it's an 11-minute anime. Like a shorter run anime. And I know people get annoyed by this, but part of me thinks that you could cut this show down and condense it to 11 minutes. It's just because there's not much going on other than the cooking. I feel that, like I said, I did after a while use it as like a digital cookbook, going back and watching it for recipes specifically.
So I'm wondering though too, if it has to do kind of like with what kind of show it is and the premise behind it and everything. So like I give an example all the time that actually one of my favorite fantasy anime that have come out in recent years is Grimgar Fantasy and Ash. A lot of people I still remember like chatting in the forums on Crunchyroll while it was airing and everything, that a lot of people kept getting annoyed because the story wasn't progressing fast enough, because it's set in a fantasy world. It's technically an isekai series, but it's one of those things that it barely even touches on the isekai part of it. The main characters, it takes them like 3/4 of the season just to learn how to fight goblins without getting themselves killed. But that's what I liked about it, is how slow and how developing it was. And it's like they try to make it more grounded, and even though it's a fantasy world, it's a real fantasy world. And that's what I think is kind of like a similar aspect with this show, is that it's still dealing with real world issues, and it's kind of getting you to pay attention more to what's going on minute by minute as opposed to day by day or week by week.
Would you say it's kind of like a biopic in that sense? Like it's more of an intimate style show, right? No?
That's actually a pretty decent comparison there. So yeah, I mean, because it's focusing on the characters and it's focusing on what they're doing, but it's focusing on what some people might view as a mundane task. And that's, like I said, what ties everything together.
That's interesting. Speaking about that and speaking about the mundane, let's go into characters. I'm not saying that the characters are mundane, but some of them are. So in this show, you have your main cast of characters, which is Tsumugi-chan, Kouhei, Kotori, and then you have your side characters, which is Shinobu, Yagi, and would you say the mum is a side character? I think she only appears in like one episode, but
I wouldn't.
well, she's a guest appearance,
Yeah,
but
there you go. Yes, star.
But at the same time, we learn a lot about the mum through her recipes. And we learn a lot about her mum through the TV appearances. So I don't know. I would say that she is a supporting character. It is quite a small cast of characters, especially for the show. And it kind of adds to the whole intimacy of the show, especially what you were saying about the whole minute by minute thing. The characters in themselves, not really notable for me. Do you know what I mean?
Outside of what I would consider being the main three of Kouhei, Tsumugi, and Kotori, I think that's pretty right. Now, I did personally really like Shinobu just because like I thought she was a very fun character, but at the same time, if they didn't even bring in Shinobu or Yagi, it really wouldn't even take anything away from the series. They did add to the series, but if they never even appeared, it wouldn't take anything away either.
I agree with you, but at the same time, I think with Yagi, he was kind of needed. And the reason why is because Yagi has a whole plot point about, as you said, the guy drinking his beer. It kind of worked out in that way. So I kind of felt that you needed Yagi at least for that one episode. But I agree with you. It's like he's not necessarily needed for other episodes. And I think the show knows this to a certain degree. That's why they even put like Yagi and Shinobu together in certain episodes, just because you kind of can't have one without the other. Like they kind of need both of them together to kind of justify themselves being there, if that makes sense.
They're kind of like different sides of the same coin.
And the fact that even themselves as characters, that they're so linked. Like, okay, it just happens to be that Yagi buys from their parents' store. You know what I mean? So they are very like closely related as a character. So it's kind of, as you mentioned, two sides of the same coin. They're basically one character. I don't think you can have one without the other, in my opinion.
I didn't mean like as in the characters themselves don't actually matter, because obviously they do, but what I mean is like had they never even been introduced, if they never even put in that part of the story, you would still have the main three doing the cooking. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean that's true, and that's exactly the point. The whole point of the show is to focus on this journey that Kouhei is going on from since his wife passed away. The show can't really continue without Kotori-chan. It can't continue without Tsumugi, and obviously Kouhei is the dad, so it can't continue at all. So as you said, those characters mean a lot. They're kind of like the Trinity in that sense. Like you can't have one without any of the other. Like if you remove Tsumugi-chan, there's no point of doing the show.
But I will say that I am glad that we got Yagi and Shinobu as well, because I do think as I said before, they added to the story, and they're kind of like a distraction at times too, to kind of break away from, you know, the same old every single episode kind of thing. Now, I will say a character that I wish we could have actually gotten would be Kotori's mom. Like I thought it would have been awesome if there had been some episodes where she was teaching them how to cook, since it was her restaurant.
Definitely, as you mentioned, it is her restaurant. But going on to that, I also kind of agree with you, but I also disagree. I would have liked to have seen Tsumugi's mom. I know it sounds a bit weird because she's passed away, but I thought it would have been very interesting because we kind of see glimpses of her in flashbacks of her cooking, but it's like stills. It's not actually her making food. I would have liked to have seen, because I think there was that one bit where, at least early on, he was taking from the mother's cookbook, right? He was using his wife's recipes and his wife's cookbook. And it's like, I want to see more of that. I want to see more of these references to the mum. What role is Kotori-chan playing in this whole show in terms of relationships between characters, right? Because I can imagine Kouhei kind of sees her as the student, right? So, but at the same time, he sees her as the master. Do you know what I mean? Because he's learning a lot from her. His main goal isn't romance, and that's very clear for Kouhei. Like he's not interested in that way, and you can tell. But his goal is, I'm taking this opportunity to learn as much as I can. Think about it from his perspective. She is 16. I think by the time she goes to university, she might go to different prefecture. So he might lose out on that knowledge, first of all. Right? So he might be thinking about it in that way. I know I'm speculating, but that makes sense to me. And also the fact that, you know, the mum is a chef. So he can imagine that, okay, if the mum is a chef, she might know how to cook as well. And that's an assumption he makes in the beginning. Hence why he was surprised that she doesn't really chop vegetables or anything like that. So there's that relationship there. But I'm interested to know Tsumugi's relationship, because we know that Tsumugi-chan doesn't have a mum, and she references the other kids. Oh, blah, blah, blah's mum is like that. You know what I mean? Like the other kids in kindergarten, she sees how their mums are. And it's kind of evident in the episode where it was like, oh, my mum made me this. My mum made me this bag and whatever. And she gets really attached to the bag that her mum made for her. and she was upset when the dad wanted to buy her a new bag. But she was happy at the same time when the dad took on that role, that sort of maternal role as well. But obviously, you see later on in the anime that the dad is not enough for her. You know, she needs that sort of mum figure. And that's why she was so excited to see Kotori's mom. She was like, oh, like she didn't refer to her as Mrs. I don't know what her name, I think it's Iida or something. I can't remember, but she didn't reference the mom as auntie, she didn't reference whatever. She referenced the mom as Kotori-chan's mom, right?
She's like Kotori's mama.
Exactly. So it was like she respected that was a maternal figure for her. But at the same time, it makes me think, is Kotori-chan a mother figure to her as well? And that's something that I wanted to establish, because we see with other characters, at least with Shinobu, you can tell that she's more of a One-chan sort of figure, you know? A big sister type, definitely. But you don't see that with Kotori-chan. Kotori-chan seems to me like this sort of motherly figure, if that makes sense. Especially, and you see it a lot with the episode when she ran off, and you know, and the first place she went to was Kotori-chan.
That's actually a really interesting point. I don't know if, like, I would say it's, you know, a maternal relationship, but it's definitely more than a big sister relationship too. But I also think some of that might even be stemming from Kouhei himself, because, you know, we see right from the start when he's desperate to get something good for Tsumugi to eat, like, and there's no food that, you know, he can make, and the first place that he thinks to go is to Kotori's mother's restaurant, because she just happened to mention it like in a passing conversation with them, and he knew that she was a like dependable student at the school, so he's like, it's nearby, let's go here. And then from there on, like, it's more of, for lack of better words, an atmosphere thing. Like, it's cozy. Kotori, I think, helps bring him that coziness, and then also them knowing that it's her mother's restaurant. That's why it comes back to her recognizing Kotori's mom as her mom and not Mrs. Iida. You know, it's I think that's what it comes down to.
The relationship is quite odd, because it's not something that I've ever seen before. As you mentioned, it might not be necessarily maternal, but I do definitely think that Tsumugi sees her as a positive female role model, at least, even
Absolutely.
if it's not necessarily a mother figure, because she doesn't have a mom, you know what I mean?
Right.
And she sees how everyone else's mums are. Like, I can't remember that one kid. That kid, he's such a shithead.
Mikio.
Yes, I fucking hate him, but at the same time I like him. Like, his mum, she's so mean and stern with him. And then you have the other one, the one that has the little girl that has the black hair. Like,
Yeah,
her mum is pretty,
remember.
like, yeah, I mean, she's a bit plain, but the mum is also plain as well. But the mum is like typical, like, calm. You know what I mean? So you see all these different archetypes of mothers in this anime. It seems as if Tsumugi-chan is trying to figure out which mom she wants to have, if that makes sense.
It's weird talking about, you know, strictly the anime without comparing to what I do know about the manga from the bit that I have read, that it kind of evolves into a story where it's not the focus, but it evolves into Tsumugi growing up and discovering herself and what she wants out of life, you know, with the people she cares about.
I mean, that was the one thing that sort of stood out to me in terms of characters and character development. So I'm not sure if there is anything that you want to kind of mention.
I just want to mention this just because, like, it's hilarious how we were just bringing up Mikio and Mikio's mom, and like, I love it how, like, he's a little shit, but then at the same time he does, like, admit to being wrong, even though with, like, snot coming out of his nose and crying and all stuff. And I love it where, like, the mom finds out about some of the stuff that he's said and done, and she's literally like, are you being a little shit? Yeah, stop being a little shit.
See, I like that. I don't know, there's something about it. Like, I don't want to say this kid is going to end up like a delinquent or anything like that, but it kind, in anime, like, when you see that sort of mom-son relationship, in particular that sort of relationship, it kind of reminds me of Bakugo from My Hero Academia in a sense, because his mom is the same way, you know? They're only like that because they don't want their kids to be a dickheads, you know what I mean? So I thought that was quite interesting. I just want to end off the whole character discussion with character design. I've noticed that the character designs in the anime is obviously it's very different to a lot of anime. Like you see, like if you were to compare it with something like Toradora, I know Toradora is a high school anime, but you have characters with freaky hair colors, like bright blue hair or pink hair. But this show, it kind of adds to the realism that their hairstyles are pretty usual for people living in Japan. Yes, Yagi, I imagine that his hair wasn't always blonde. I'm guessing he's trying to go for the bad boy look. But even Tsumugi and her hairstyle itself is quite big, it's quite poofy, and it's quite golden as well. It makes me think that, is her mom a foreigner? Because, blonde hair is not really something that you see in Japanese people, right? So to see that, it makes me think, is she a foreigner? And it kind of goes into the whole voice that Tsumugi-chan has, because it doesn't sound like typical Japanese either. So it makes me think, is the mom gaijin in some form?
You have to kind of remember though here too that a lot of times the reason that you see characters with like crazy hair colors and crazy eye colors is because 99% of everyone in Japan has black hair, brown eyes. So it's just a way to help differentiate characters and add character to them, because I hate to use that cliche term because I think it's kind of like a slippery slope, but like the whole we don't see race kind of thing, where obviously Japanese people do, but it's one of those things where even though these characters are Japanese, they're not being portrayed visually as only being Japanese. Just getting into the character design, this is something that I made notes of in myself with character design that I thought was interesting about this, is that the person that actually did the character design for the anime, which of course, it's different in the anime versus the manga, is the same guy who was the character designer for Yu-Gi-Oh! And he was also the key animator for the opening song and animation and credits for both Aono Exorcist or Blue Exorcist and Anohana. So like he's got like a bunch of different stuff. He's also worked on other series like Chiafuru, the original Full Metal Alchemist, different series like that. So that's like you kind of see little touches of, like I said, the more I don't want to use the word simplistic yet striking character designs. Like you can tell this is that character, this is that character. No two characters look alike in the series. Like even the little kids don't look the same.
I could maybe contribute that to the lack of characters in the show to begin with. But yeah, no, you're right. There's no two characters that look the same. I would say even then, like you can see where Tsumugi gets a lot of the features from in terms of the mother. I'm not sure if the dad has the same color eyes as Tsumugi. I think so. I'm not sure if she does or not. Seeing that was quite interesting, and obviously seeing Kotori and Kotori-chan's mom, and yeah, there is the variance between the two, but the dad just looks like, I don't want to say he looks like your average anime protagonist, but
I think that's on purpose though too, because he's supposed to be like an everyman father. But talking about the character design with like Tsumugi, is that she's got, I would describe it as a chibi look, small body with this big head, the giant eyes, but that's to go into playing on the fact that she is a young child. It adds to that youth factor for her.
It seemed a bit off to me. I thought maybe she was like 5 or 6 or something like that.
During the show, she does turn 5 during the show. I don't remember when exactly this happened, but when it starts, she's 4 and she turns 5. And like I said, looking, at the bit of the manga that I have, read and looked into as she gets older.
I always thought in Japan that they had these, those book bags, the ones that they buy them at like kindergarten, and it stays for them for like 20 years. You know which ones I'm talking about?
They wear them all the way up through elementary school. Then when they go to junior high school, they get like a proper school backpack. But yeah, I can't remember the Japanese name for it, but literally it just means school bag.
They're really expensive. They're like what, like $1,000 or something?
They're super expensive. Like, yeah, but that's because they're designed to last a long time.
I didn't see that in the show, and I was like, oh, I thought that there was a missing opportunity there. Like, how come we didn't see the traditional bag and the yellow hat? Like the platelets from Cells at Work. I was expecting to see more of that. You know what I mean?
That's also one of those things that like it's touched on in so many different series and stuff like that too. They probably didn't feel the need to do it since like really the show is about food.
Speaking of food, and I think that's probably a great transition into art style animation. I've noticed that the colors that they use are quite, I wouldn't say muted, but they're not like crazy colors that we see in a lot of slice of life or romance animes. It kind of brings more focus onto the meals itself, because when you see them cutting cooking fish, for example, it glistens like underneath the light, stuff like that.
I made the same notes talking about the art style, where it's like, I don't want to say that the characters are flat, but there's not as much definition. It's very minimal, like shading and contrast on them. They still look really good, and they still pop, and they use like a lot of pastels and earth tones.
Yeah.
But then when it comes to the food is like detailed, very realistic, and like when it shows them cutting things, it actually shows cutting. Like the color palette of the food looks natural.
And I think obviously that is down to the shading and the coloring, but also lighting effects. Because I've noticed, I know it sounds a bit weird, but staying at home a lot, you kind of notice what colors your ceiling lights are. You know what I mean? Like warm or like cool tones and whatnot. And usually in restaurants, they tend to go for sort of warmer tones because you're trying to make it seem like it's warm and inviting. And especially in certain restaurants, the idea is to make you want to stay there for as long as possible. But if you're like going into like a McDonald's, it's always bright lights because they're trying to push you out. They're trying to get as many customers in. And you kind of see this with Kotori's home, whether it's in the tatami room or in the main restaurant bar area. It's warm tones. You kind of see like wood grain a lot as well. And it sort of adds to that sort of, as you mentioned, earthiness, but also the feeling of being at home. And I was watching this anime and I feel cozy. You know, I feel warm inside because of the environment.
It's funny that you're mentioning it. I'm sitting here thinking about like the different places that I like to go to eat when I do eat out, and every place I go, like even to like fast food chain places like Sukiya and Ramen Family, it's all wood grains, it's all earth tones, it's all warm lighting. You know, it's nothing is really made to push you out. That's a really good point. Yeah, I'd never even really paid much attention to that.
Like I said, it's because I was staying at home, but it also reminded me of something one of my professors said at university. I was designing a restaurant for one of my years in uni, and the guy was saying, what do you want it to feel like? Do you want it to be a McDonald's where you want people to just fuck off, or do you want it to be like a family restaurant where people are encouraged to stay for as long as possible? And you kind of get that feeling.
Now that I think about it, there's one place it's not bright lights to like push you out, but there's a conveyor sushi place near me I go to from time to time. But when you go in there, because they're cutting the sushi right there and then putting it on the conveyor that goes around the restaurant, all that type of stuff, everything is all like ceramic tiles and, you know, more bright lighting than warm because they have to see what they're doing and things like that. So that's not as much, but most of it's very, very comfy.
Don't you find also that in those restaurants, I know we're going on a tangent, but I think it's also very prevalent to say because I think it relates to the anime, but don't you also find that in those restaurants, at least from what I've seen sushi restaurants to be like, you see ceramic tiles, but I'm guessing that's for hygiene, but don't you see more like blue colors? You know what I mean? Like
yes.
The wall might be blue as opposed to, you know, a gray or a brown sort of color that you might see in, for example, Coco Curry.
No, you're absolutely right. So if you go to what I would call a quick sushi restaurant, like a conveyor sushi or like a place that you just go in, grab a few bites and get out, it's like that. It's your blue colors and, you know, the tile and all that type of stuff. Then adverse to that, if you go to a more like mom and pop shop type sushi place where it's like it's made to order, like you know, you eat and then you tell them what you want next, and they make it there while you're sitting at like the table or the bar where they're making sushi, then it's the more darker earth tones and the warmer colors.
And I think that for me, that was like my main point in terms of the art style and animation. I mean, the animation itself wasn't that impressive to me, but I can understand because it's not an action show. You know, you don't need something that is high frame rate to see any battle sequences. Everything is quite slow. Like even the process of cooking, they take their time. So I understand why the animation doesn't pop out as much, but the colors do help it a lot.
And then just doubling back, but then like you said, the contrast against all that, the food itself all looks really good.
Definitely. And I think if it wasn't, then this show for me wouldn't have been as good.
I totally agree with that. Like, you know, you have the characters, but then the meals are kind of like the star of each episode.
It's very odd for me to say this because usually on Kunai, we don't focus on sound design, but I think the sound also adds to it because yes, it's food. It's a very visual medium, but also food. You need to smell a lot of it as well because half the taste is in the smell, you know. But because we're kind of deprived of that, you need another form of sensory enhancement. You can tell with the chopping. Specifically, I think I noticed it when they were chopping it into the sweet potato. You know that huge fucking sweet potato they were chopping into?
Yep.
Like there was a resistance, and you can hear it in the knife, and you heard it like a clonk. You know what I mean? and it's as if you're chopping it in real life. You see a lot of food anime when they're chopping really fast and shit, and it's like you don't really notice what's going on, and you don't really appreciate that it's actually taking a long time to cut something. And it's even with the sizzling sounds of the foods. It's like, oh shit, okay, you can tell that's made with an oil or that's made with eggs or something that's causing that reaction. And it sort of adds to the whole, I don't know, it's making my mouth water a little bit just from sounds. And I think that's in itself very interesting. And it's not something that you see in anime a lot.
Again, totally agreeing with you here. And even going into them, like even having just the sounds of like boiling and bubbling water, or the sounds of the sink when they're just washing the rice, and you could hear the rice kind of being shifted and sifted around in the bowl as they're like, how you wash rice and then you drain it and everything, all those little sounds. And how you said like your mouth is watering just thinking about that. But that's what these audio responses like ASMR, why people like get tinglies when they listen to that, because it makes you think about what is coming, what is causing this sound. So especially if it's a food that you like, you're going to have those kind of responses to it, and it's going to make you feel good.
Definitely. There was one thing that you mentioned pre-recording, and I think this is very interesting because I don't really necessarily have notes on it, but it's more so the voice acting, and it was specifically about Tsumugi. I don't know if you want to sort of elaborate on that.
Yeah, so Tsumugi herself was voiced by a voice actress. Her name is Rina Endo. And at the time of recording the show, she was 10 years old. They specifically went out and wanted to get a child voice actor for this role. And she's gone on to do other shows. She's done voices in video games. She actually does a voice in Grand Blue Fantasy. That's also a child. So I think she did a great job. And it's so funny thinking about, she was 10 at the time playing a 4 to 5 year old, and she like nails it, because she obviously can just recall what it was like being that, at that age.
And I think that was quite interesting because especially in I'm not sure if the show is dubbed. I don't think it is. But a lot of these shows, right, especially if you're looking at American dubs, or even if you're looking at shows in general, like other shows that have children, it's usually an older female voice, that is like, for example, Bart Simpson, right? The woman that voices Bart, like how old is she? She's not a child, you know what I mean? Bart's supposed to be 10 years old. So a lot of the time in anime, whether it is dub or subs, right, they don't actually go out and take that extra mile and actually hire a child. They hire an adult that does a child's voice, and it's not necessarily noticeable most of the time, but I think in this anime it would have felt a bit off, because I didn't notice that Tsumugi was actually voiced by a child. I didn't notice this at all. I assumed that it was, someone like maybe in their 30s trying to do a child's voice. But now that I realize it and I try and recall smaller characters in anime, one thing that I'm remembering is, K-On! I'm not sure if you remember K-On!
Oh yeah.
There's a scene in K-On! When they go back in time where they're putting the star on the Christmas tree, and they're like, what, maybe similar age to Tsumugi. Obviously, you could tell that it's those same voice actors acting like children.
Like 4 and 5 year olds, yeah.
The difference is striking. Like you could tell, as you mentioned, she is recalling those memories of being a child and bringing it into the acting, and I think it works really well.
Well, and I think what it also comes down to in the end with like a detail of something like that, it is like annotations. So like when you're an adult and you're trying to act like a child, like just think of like a child being surprised or a child saying wow and stuff like that. It's kind of hard to be an adult and do that, younger high-pitched voice without still having part of yourself in that. Whereas with, her still being at a child, when she's like, "Suye," you still hear that as a child.
It brings on another point as well, because her voice is very unique. It is very different to the other school children that you see, in her classroom. You know what I mean? So I noticed that I was a bit confused, and I think this is probably why I thought the mum wasn't Japanese. The fact that Tsumugi doesn't speak proper Japanese. I know she's a child, but the accent threw me off a lot, because it's like, where did she get it from? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if it's like a sort of, how some kids have a lisp or like a speech impediment, and I understand that, and sometimes a lot of TV shows add that in to make the kid look cuter than they are. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if that's the case here or if it is a particular accent somewhere in Japan.
So I don't know if you have seen the show, but just like looking up, Rina Endo, just to see what she did after Sweetness and Lightning. She did Hinako no, which she was Chiaki, who's one of the main characters on there. So if you see that show, you'll be like, wait a minute, that's the same kid? Like, they're completely different.
So you think that she's putting on like a particular accent? Like that's the thing that threw me off. It was like, where in Japan is this accent from? Because the voice reminds me that she's speaking like, your typical gaijin in an anime where they speak very odd Japanese.
I literally think it was just her trying to put on the voice to have, maybe not the best speaking grammar, because it's hard to say speaking grammar because grammar is mostly from writing. But, I think it was her trying to speak as a child because, when you're that age, you're still even formulating how to put together sentences and how to say the right thing. So it might have been a touch of that. She was really trying to think what it was like as being a child, but she also wasn't having to stretch to do it because, going from, a 4 or 5-year-old child to a 10-year-old child isn't really that big of a change when it comes to that mentality type of thing. Because like your neurons in your brain haven't even fully connected until you're like 18 anyway.
And I think it's very interesting to ask this question more so for you because obviously being a teacher and whatnot, but have you found that there are students that speak in a similar way to Tsumugi in the sense that sentences aren't properly formed or the wrong sentences are used?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like I will have, just to go along with that, when I will teach some of them something in English and I've taught them the same thing 20 times in the same year, but every time I ask them the same question, they still get the response wrong. You know what I mean? Because they're still kids. They're still, I don't want to say in one ear, out the other, but, some kids, it just takes them longer to, be able to formulate these thoughts and how to express them vocally than it does others.
One thing that I wanted to mention briefly is, and I'm not sure if you really have notes on this, is the opening and the ending of the show. More so for me, I thought the ending was okay. I preferred the opening only because it was interesting. There was a lot of shots. You can tell that, there's a lot of anime that they just reuse animation from the show. Like you can tell this was all done from scratch because there is no flying like you don't see a scene where she's flying on top of Mr. Gali Gali. There's nothing like that. So it was always interesting to see the opening, but the opening got me hyped for the show and you got to see the whole cast of characters, even the ones that you don't really see, like Mikio-kun and the teacher is like the kindergarten teacher. You don't really see them as much, but it generates hype for the show in a very sort of cutesy genki. That's the sort of word I would use to describe it. I can't really explain it in English, but genki is the correct word I would use to describe this opening,
Yeah, Genki just means like energetic, and I think that's a really good word. So I'll just literally read my notes that I have for the OP and ED. So the OP was memorable and catchy but simple and captures a child's imagination, whereas I said the ending is good but kind of forgettable, but I still actually really enjoyed it. So and then I put like a little line here where I had to like draw a note, elsewhere. And I said, got people hyped for the show.
Going into the sort of end part of the episode, I just wanted to know, do you want to see a second season of the show? Would that be of interest to you?
Personally, I absolutely would love to see a second season of the show. That's like I said, on a personal level, I would love to see that.
Like for me, I know this might sound a bit weird. I would not. I actually would not. I would hate a second season of the show. Because the ending, the way that the show works is that, once again, there is no overarching story, right? And I don't know if they're going to follow the manga. Yes, you would technically get more of it because I would assume you would see Tsumugi grow physically. So there'll probably be some sort of story arcs based around that. But if it is going to be another 12-episode anime, I don't think it's going to be sustainable for a second season. What I would like to see, because I actually do enjoy the story a lot more, I would like to see a prequel.
So, and the reason that I say that I would want to see a second season is like someone from me, I love slice of life anime. I love simple anime. I love shows like Nan Nan Biyori and Yoru Camp, like ones that you just put on just to enjoy, just to relax, just to enjoy the characters and be in the moment type of thing. So that's why I said, being greedy here, I would want a season 2 just to have more of that.
Like, if it was a show like Food Wars has like a story behind it and there is a goal to meet. I mean, this show doesn't, so I don't really see the need for a second season. Yeah, I know fans of the show might be upset by that, but like I said, with the prequel, and I know recently I've been asking for prequels a lot on Kunai, and I think Kevin was the one that probably suggested that first, but a prequel for this show would be very interesting because I would like to see what the mum used to cook for Tsumugi-chan, because obviously the mum died when Tsumugi was 4, so there's at least maybe 3 or 4 years that you can explore, and the mum has a cookbook that's already established, so I would want to see that kind of come out a lot more, and see maybe the relationship that Kouhei had with his wife, because she's not mentioned a lot, and I want to see, it's very evident that he loves his wife, right? Especially because he loves his child. So I want to see more of that. I want to see more of the actual happy family unit, how Tsumugi was before, because obviously a lot of Tsumugi's problems are kind of revolving around the fact that she doesn't have a mum anymore. So I would like to see how the mum would have dealt with a lot of these issues while she was alive, and I think that would have been lovely to see, in my personal opinion.
For me, I think it would be a little bit more heartbreaking though to go back and do a prequel like that, because it's one of the things like you kind of know where it's going to go. I would rather see them like continue on, from where it left off, but then delve more into the cookbook, because like you could tell that how much effort and love she put into the cookbook, like even with all the little pictures and side notes that she made in there about likes and dislikes and what ingredients to use. But then they could still go on and do like the previous relationship with the dad, maybe through like flashbacks, him looking at a recipe like, I remember this, and then going back to a time when that came about type of thing. So they could still intermingle it in there, but I don't think I would want to see just a straight up prequel of that.
The only way you can do that is if you have an overarching story, and I think if there was a second season, it would be more of the same. And I think, yes, it would be heartbreaking to see the mum dying. That is just true, and I understand that. But at the same time, it allows for character development. I think you can learn more about Kouhei in a suggested prequel than you would ever learn about him in subsequent seasons, and I think that's why I want that prequel. I know it'll be heartbreaking, but I think it's needed.
Okay, but on the reverse side of that, though, you're then going back into a time where there wouldn't even be a Tsumugi character, and really she's kind of like the focal point of this series. And then
I don't know, the way that I'm thinking about it is that it starts off pretty, not really early on, but like when she's in kindergarten and whatnot, and then having the mum, picking her up from school and whatnot, and making food for the family and all that kind of stuff. And then it ends right when the mum dies. I know it sounds so sadistic. There's a lot of opportunity to actually have a story. There is an overarching story if you did that, because there is a known goal at the end. Obviously, the mum dying being that goal. I sound like such an evil bastard saying this, but I genuinely think that there is a lot more to delve into using the mum as a story point.
I understand where you are coming from, but like I said, I think that you could still do all of that via like flashbacks, either within an episode or have entire episodes of flashbacks in a season 2. That's just where I'm coming from with that.
All right, we'll agree to disagree, I guess. And finally, who would you recommend this show to, and would you recommend this show to anyone?
I would recommend it. It's a great experience with many life lessons, real recipes, a nice setting and characters. Good for many different age groups, but perhaps not to the average anime fan.
Okay, why is that?
Well, I've recently gotten to many, I don't want to say arguments, but discussions where like your average anime fan outside of Japan is actually a lot different. Like it's really a different world, where your average anime fan seems to be more, and I hate the pigeonhole here, more interested in the action, the shonen, and all that kind of stuff. So people who tell me, it's like, oh, what, I ask them like, oh, you like anime? Cool. What have you watched? It's like, oh, I love like Naruto and Dragon Ball and Attack on Titan. It's like, okay, action, like those type of people. Now, if you say, I watched that, and then like I like stuff like ReZero, I like stuff like K-On!, like if you start telling me these different genres, then I know I'm like, okay, you're a little bit more open and receptive to something that maybe you should try this show. And then if you watch this and you don't like it, then it's like, okay, maybe this slice of life type stuff isn't for them.
Okay, now you know what, I was gonna get into an argument with you, but then now I kind of see your point, because on Kunai that was our kind of our goal from the beginning, like introducing each other to different genres of anime and learning and being more open and receptive to all of these different genres and different topics that anime is focused on. But for me, I would say I would recommend this as a first anime for a lot of people. I wouldn't necessarily say this as a show for seasoned anime veterans, but for people that are just getting into anime. Because going off the whole Oremo episode, I know a lot of people have the stigma against anime. Oh, it's ecchi, it's hentai, it's this and that. This is a show that is fun for all the family. You know, it has its moments, but I think it's also because it's very true to life. You know, the characters are very human, and I think people relate to that a lot. That's why a lot of people like watching dramas. A lot of people like watching sitcoms, situational comedies, because of that reason. Like if you're on Netflix, you're watching The Office or you're watching a K-drama, because people like sort of real stories. And I think if, you know, you want to introduce your parents to anime, this is a show that I would show them. Why? Because it is very relatable. You know, they can relate to Kouhei's struggle, you know, as parents, for example.
Like if someone's going to come to me and is like, you know what, you know a lot of anime, I kind of thinking about getting into it, what would you recommend? I could definitely see this as a recommendation for. That's why I said perhaps not to the average anime fan, like, you know, putting that.
Like I said, because it's human, it can work really well in that sense. Also, the Japanese use, even if people, I'm not sure if there is a dub. I don't think there is. Maybe there might be, but I don't know. I would assume not. But the Japanese used, because it is most of the time is conversation with children, it is easy to understand. I wouldn't say easy to understand Japanese, but there isn't many complex words, and I think people won't necessarily get caught up on reading the subtitles as much, because there's not really fast conversations that occur in the show. And I would say to you a lot of the time, and I know I'm going on a tangent here, but there have been times in my watch throughs where I've turned off subtitles completely just to watch the show, because I've kind of understood what's going on, and the Japanese is so simple that I kind of understand what is going on and whatnot. But like I said, yeah, the show I would say is very beginner friendly. I don't know where people would go afterwards, but then it's up for them to sort of decide where they move on from there. But
I'm just sitting here thinking, just running through my head. It's like thinking of this as like a gateway anime. Oh, you like Sweetness and Lightning? Well, check out Food Wars. Oh, you like Food Wars? Then, you know, check out DxD. Anime
is so closely linked together. I can kind of see how you can kind of move on to other shows, like you mentioned, Food Wars from DxD. I mean, Food Wars to DxD is a big jump, but okay, I'm
thinking because of like the scantily clad women and the exploding clothes and stuff like that. So yeah,
that being said, I think this was a really great episode. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in today, listening to this episode. Tell us what you think on our Discord page. If you go to getalivepodcast.com/Discord, send us your suggestions and actually argue with us. If you think, oh, this episode was shit, tell us. If you think, oh, Bish, you know what, I don't agree with your point on this particular character, whatever, be honest with us, because we really do enjoy this discussion, and this show doesn't happen without discussion. And I also want to thank Will for coming on. Hopefully we'll see more of Will in the future as we do these sort of two-man episodes during COVID. So if you guys liked him, we'll bring him on in the future. And thank you, Will, for coming on.
My pleasure, man. It's a blast. You know, I love listening to the episodes, and I love being able to come on to the episodes. So, you know, I love anime.
See, that's why I bring Will on. He knows so much about anime, and he's just... the funny thing is, like, Will started off as a fan, if I'm not mistaken. Like, you started off listening to the podcast before.
Yeah, you can blame Tyson. I don't even remember how I got to talking to Tyson. I mean, this has been, you know, years ago now. And then like I think it was actually something video game related, and then it came up about liking anime. He's like, oh, you like anime? Check out this podcast.
You know what, Tyson, my guy. Thank you, Tyson. Tyson's done that so many different times as well.
Tyson should work in PR.
You know what? Well, he should. I mean, that would be really awesome. If he worked in like press and stuff like that, he would really succeed in that. I think he just has a way of introducing people, and I think he has so much networking skills. Like, anyway, this isn't the Tyson fan club episode.
Tyson and I disagree on more things than we agree on, but we agree that we like anime and we like Get a Life podcast.
I want to end this episode, but I don't want it to sound like a Tyson fan episode, because you know what, we might as well do that at this point. But I just want to end on one last point about Tyson. You mentioned this whole agreeing and disagreeing thing, but that's what makes Kunai interesting. Okay, there's some other shows out there, I don't want to call them out, but there's some other shows out there that circle jerk. You know what I mean? We know who they are.
Every day I'm like getting followers on Twitter and then I lose them on Twitter because I was like, hey, this guy likes anime. And he's like, oh, he talks bad about the anime I like, or it's like, hey, he doesn't like the same people I like, or I call out people for being circle jerkers and hypocrites and all that stuff. Oh, but one other thing, you know what the best thing is about Tyson?
What? What's the best thing?
He's not Kevin.
Whoa, whoa, whoa! Why are you shitting
I'm
on
just
Kevin?
kidding. I love you, Kevin. No, I had to make that joke. I love all you guys. So seriously,
it's because of Haganai, isn't it? It's the damage that Kevin done on Haganai. Was that it?
I'm not gonna say yes or no to that, but no, like I said, really, I appreciate you having me on the show, and I appreciate all you guys. So yeah, seriously.
Anyway, that being said, bye guys.
Bye.